I address this unto Lord President Barack Obama. Mr. President, you have a few weeks yet in which you are still officially the President of the United States. And in that time, I urge you, Lord President Obama, to do all you can to take a stand against the violence that is occurring towards the water protectors at the Dakaota pipeline. That has been started at Standing Rock. Lord President, let us never forget, neither you nor your colleagues in Washington, whether in the Senate, the House, or the judicial branch, nor anyone else, that anybody or very nearly anybody who was here whose ancestors came here at the late 1500s or after, are not people who, in the very truest sense of the word, could call this ancestrally our native country. Political squabbles aside, archaeological squabbles aside, broadly speaking, the Sioux and many of the indigenous tribes of our continent have been here for thousands, if not millions of years. Certainly their ancestors have. And while those brave veterans who have chosen to self-deploy there and showed themselves brave enough, kind enough, strong enough, and tolerant enough to to stand with the water protesters and guard them. While they are to be commended, what has been happening at Standing Rock and what those, whether police or the military officials other than those veterans who self-deployed in order to stand and guard the water protesters. What the US military has been doing. They're outside of those veterans. Is not right. While I can only think that the construction of the quote unquote free speech zone was intended as a compromise to try to give the protesters and supporters a space to keep on voicing their opinions while also starting the project a little more thoroughly and such. While I imagine that free speech zone was, as I said, intended as a sort of compromise to attempt to content both sides at least a little bit. Clearly, it has not worked yet. And while I myself have never really felt culturally home, in the broad American culture, I also imagine that if I were living on my ancestral soil, especially one at the end of the ancestral soil that sang most to my spirit, which is Britain. England specifically. But if I had been living there in this lifetime for years upon years myself, and my ancestors had been too, I imagine that if I had an occupying power, that had control politically speaking, of the soil that my ancestors had walked on, sung on, hunted on, preyed on. I imagine that if this foreign power, which had political dominance of my ancestral soil for a couple hundred years, when my ancestors had been there for thousands, hundreds of thousands, I imagine that if they came, that the company from the descent that was founded by the descendants of that occupying power came and tried to build something potentially very destructive that would pollute the soil and the life, the, the animals, the soil, the water, the environment on my people's land, on my ancestors' home and sacred sites and the places that they'd held holy, where they'd held ritual, where they had prayed, they had worried and worked and hugged and cried and laughed and hosted banquets and gatherings. If I then had this company come in and start to build something that threatened those sacred lands, and this and the foreign occupying power just said, "Oh, here, you can't gather and protest this on your own land, but here's this free speech zone that we've built for you, where you can go ahead and say what you want." I would be kind of upset. I'd be hurt. I would feel deeply hurt and angry. Lord President, please stand up against what has been happening at Standing Rock. Show the water protectors and the people who support them and the indigenous tribes of this continent that had become the United States of America. Please show them. And please show them and those who support them that you care. That you care. You have a few more weeks in which you can do it. And I know you can. You're a brave man. And a good man. And I may not have agreed with every decision you made during your presidency. But I think you've been a pretty damn good president. And you have a few more weeks left in which to still be a good president. And to stand up for the water protectors, for the sacred standing rock, and for a people among many who were here before us, to which non-indigenous Americans, whether we are from Europe or otherwhere, owe a lot. Tons. Blessings, Milord President Obama. Lily Willie. Laughlin-Rose. Blessings.